back in the hot seat, but this time I'm joined by Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson. We have a lot to recap today, so grab a cup of coffee, maybe a bite to eat, and let's go ahead and get started. So Laura, I can't imagine that you went to bed early last night. Knowing you, you do everything under the sun. So how did you feel about the election, and what did you end up doing last night?
Yeah, so I was at Fox and CBS in studio, and I'll say we went off air about 11:15. But you're right, didn't go to bed not until probably 2, and then woke up to a buzz on my phone about 5:45 saying that ultimately Trump had won the election as our 47th president. I will say probably the biggest surprise to me is not the outcome, but just the time and expediency in which we learned about the race. We thought for sure this could be one of those that we don't know for days, potentially even weeks. And many states had updated their voting systems. So Pennsylvania was one that we thought would be very slow, but they'd updated the system. Anyway, needless to say, to have that result when you're looking at Trump right now securing 277 electoral college votes, we still don't know Nevada, Arizona, and Alaska, but it's a moot point. Trump has won the presidency.
Yeah, and I was actually, so we went off air at 12:30, and then right when I got home about 1:30, that's when I found out about Pennsylvania, that Trump was projected as a winner, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is it.
Yeah, and that really, we had 7 swing states.
Yes.
So far, he's taken all that have been declared. So
yes.
North Carolina and Georgia were really early. Pennsylvania was the last one that really clinched it, and that was 19 electoral college votes. I think one thing people will be talking about, Shapiro is the governor of Pennsylvania, and at one point he was discussed as potentially Harris's running mate. Instead, she selected Walz from Minnesota. Hindsight's 2020, right? But I think a lot of the armchair political analysts will be saying, was that a mistake? Had she selected Shapiro, would she have been able to deliver Pennsylvania? But the blue wall that existed before 2016 came back for Biden, fell again. Trump took it in terms of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. That sealed the evening for him.
Yeah, and that's just crazy to me because, like, I had a feeling a lot of the swing states would go with Trump, but some of the states surprised me. I forget, Louisiana. I actually interviewed a girl named Mel Bridges from Louisiana, from LSU, and we were talking about how blue Louisiana is, but they ended up voting Republican. I will say she lives in Baton Rouge, so, I mean, it's like a blue dot, just like Indianapolis is a blue dot. But that just kind of surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think what we see is the state divides are somewhat artificial. Like, those are boundaries, but the point you're making is very real, and that's the urban and rural divide.
Yes.
And so in those blue dots, like Indianapolis, if you look at the map for Indiana in terms of the governor's race, the Senate race, the presidency, you have Monroe County, which is Bloomington, you have the very northwest part of the state of Indiana, and Indianapolis that are blue. The rest of the state is red. And I think you see that throughout the country where that urban-rural divide is very real, and it's very divisive, right? It's very polarized in terms of whether you live in a rural area or urban area and which party you ultimately support.
Well, you kind of touched on the topic, but the gubernatorial race.
Yes.
Are you surprised by that?
Yeah,
or
yes.
Really?
And
okay.
Not the outcome.
Okay.
So I would have said I thought Braun would win. The margin that he won and the time at which it was called, those are the things that surprised me. So,
early.
Yes,
very early.
Very early. And the fact that this was a race that looked like it had been narrowing. And I will say in Indiana we don't have great polling, so there's always that caveat of what does it look like it's narrowing. When we're looking at Harris-Trump, we had polling every single day. We didn't have that with Braun and McCormick, but nonetheless, Braun was able to take it out very early by a fairly wide margin. And there was a question in terms of Rainwater. He was the Libertarian candidate. He did very well in 2020. I want to say 11 or 12%. Did not do as well last night. Likely that was a defection vote from Republicans. They stuck with Braun, and ultimately Braun will be our next governor of Indiana.
Yeah, I know whenever I watched the VP debate, Rainwater, I feel like he had a lot of supporters up until the VP debate. He kind of let McCormick almost walk on him a little bit, but I'm honestly not surprised that Braun got called as early as he did. I was just like scrolling on Instagram during my break for a second, and I was like, oh, yep, not a surprise there. Put my phone back down. Indiana is such a red state that like I don't think we ever stand a chance having a Democratic or a Libertarian as
Well, and
governor.
that was certainly true last night. I think the one thing with the Libertarian candidate is sometimes you see the defections with the Republican Party, but what happened in 2020 might have been very unique, where you had Eric Holcomb, who's a very moderate governor,
Yes.
that upset some of the conservatives within the party who ultimately voted for Rainwater. Right? They didn't have anything to be upset about in this way, and so they supported Braun. I think it'll be interesting to see as we go into the state legislative session. Braun has been a part of the state legislature. He talked in his acceptance speech about working very closely with the state legislature. He's also more conservative like our state legislature. So when we saw Eric Holcomb's administration in 8 years, there was a lot of tension and conflict between Holcomb and the state house. I don't think we're going to see that with Braun, so it'll be interesting to see what policies he's able to pursue and pass through it.
Well, that was going to be my next question. In terms of policies, because obviously UND-TV, we cater this towards college students, what policies should college students be looking out for specifically with Braun? What does he plan to do while he's in office?
Yeah, well, he's talked a lot in terms of education and the economy. Those are obviously really important issues for a governor. So in Indiana, that's exactly what we'd expect to hear. That's what you should expect on the state level. But with regards to college students in particular, in terms of education, there's been a lot of focus on higher education in terms of funding and whether or not the funding is being used well. We've seen cuts in funding to
Higher education as in college?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
No, absolutely. So really like post-12, there's been an emphasis on vocational and technical opportunities for students that graduate high school. And of course we want to make sure that everyone has opportunities, but when you're funding those, that means that's taking money from college and higher education and public institutions. So that we're looking in terms of that. I would expect to see more of that under Braun.
So real quick, with the higher institution schools, like after high school, is it only like public colleges? Is it?
It can be both. Yeah, so
Okay.
funding-wise is going to be public. They can pass legislation, though, that impacts both. And there was House Bill 202 last year that really limited freedom of speech and brought up questions of tenure. Now, that applied to faculty at public institutions, but there's nothing to say that in future state legislative sessions that they might not do that for private schools too. So the funding really focuses in terms of public schools, but the legislation, the regulations, the policies, that can apply to both public and private. And I'd emphasize that if they're spending more money on vocational or technical, there's a finite amount of money you have, so that means less is going to be going into higher education, which is just a reality of what we see in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big policy that we need to look out for. But one other policy I want to discuss, which is a hot topic, obviously, in every single state, but especially Indiana, abortion and women's reproductive rights. What exactly is Braun's plan for that? I mean, is it basically going to stay the same as it is now, like the 6-week mark?
It looks like that, and actually socially he's very conservative. He's talked about how he's very strongly opposed to abortion, and that would be in line with our Indiana General Assembly. When you look back to 2022 with the Dobbs versus Jackson decision, the state house wasted no time. They had a special session that was already called for the summer, and they actually passed that legislation that's very restrictive on abortion in Indiana. I wouldn't expect Braun to change that. I think we will see basically status quo maintained in the state of Indiana with regards to that policy.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see what happens. I know like a lot of women like myself, I'm like, what is going to happen? I mean, obviously you have a young daughter, so I'm very interested to see what will happen.
Yeah, and especially because that's been given to the states in the last 2 years. We saw abortion on the ballot last night in several states. It wasn't for us here in Indiana, but I think it's become a lot more of a hot topic. It wasn't overturned, Roe versus Wade was, of course, but Dobbs made it a state level issue. So now it really is up to the governor and the state legislature, and that's why state government is so important. A lot of times people focus on national, right? But these races matter, and that's the outcome that we see now.
So shifting gears a little bit to Mr. Trump, the 47th president of the United States, his stance on abortion, it has varied so much throughout his election process. Now he is saying that he isn't like for abortion, he's not against abortion, but he is going to protect women whether they like it or not. And I know J.D. Vance, he has quote said that he is pro-family, wanting to make the economy affordable so women can, you know, raise their children and they don't have to have abortion, since the main reason women abort is because they don't have money or the resources to raise a child. So just from your standpoint, you know, because you do work with Fox and CBS, what have you heard that Trump is going to do regarding abortion?
Well, you're right. He's been very inconsistent. Generally has focused in terms of pro-life, anti-abortion. I think what was interesting, Melania Trump came out with that piece where she said, actually, I support abortion. I support women's rights to have abortion. And so it showed like a contradiction in a way with her husband, but probably is also underlining the fact that you could support a candidate but disagree with some stances, right? Some positions they have. If Melania Trump can be married to a man where she disagrees in terms of that policy, right, trying to assuage voters that they could diverge in that way, and it's still okay. I think when we look at Trump, the biggest question is going to be the Senate and the House. And the Republicans have taken the Senate. House is still too close to call. If you have a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and you have a Republican president, right, that's unified government, meaning one party dominates in all. I don't know so far they'll necessarily do anything. Republicans and the conservative Supreme Court said abortion belongs to the state. Yeah. But they would be in line and they would be in a position if they enjoy unified government to make more policies at the federal level.
So when should we get the results for the House?
Well, I hope soon. I'm not necessarily sure about that. We're looking in terms of some of those races. Democrats only needed 4 seats to pick up in the House, and it seemed likely that just as the Republicans were positioned to take the Senate, and they ultimately did, that the Democrats could potentially take the House, but we still have to wait to see on those election results, and it could, quite frankly, be days at this point.
It could be days. Okay, because I was thinking like possibly weeks or something, and I was like, no, not again. Which I'm still so surprised that we got the election results the next day.
So
that's
quickly, yeah.
insane. Another topic I wanted to bring up too, we kind of touched on it just a little bit, with abortion and everything. People are already voicing their opinions via social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, what have you. Let's talk about that a little bit and how much social media impacts this election, how it already has impacted this election with campaigns, commercials, what have you.
I mean, it plays an incredible role in terms of shaping how people think and feel about politics. The biggest concern, and I definitely saw that this election, but I think we've seen this brewing in previous election cycles too, is the way that people participate in what we call echo chambers. So that's the fact that you're likely to follow, to like, to friend, whatever it might be, people that already agree with your position.
Yeah.
So you only hear people that say the same things that you do about the politics, about the candidates, about the parties, the positions. So you feel like, oh, everyone must feel this way. And we're less likely in social media versus traditional media to engage with opinions that are different than ours. So it's really problematic in terms of polarization because it emphasizes those differences. I think in this case for social media in this election, we saw a lot of that echo chamber effect, but I think we're also going to see a lot of anger, frustration, excitement, celebration, right? Especially given that the race was called in the very early hours. Some people are still just waking up right now to this news, and we'll be seeing that expressed over the coming days and weeks.
I mean, social media just changes campaigns like no other, especially now. And it's, like you touched on it, it's extremely problematic that college students and younger students, you know, even in high school and middle school, get their news from social media because it's so catered towards what they believe. And I just really want to emphasize that it is very important to get your news from local stations, from CNN, Fox News, sorry, I'm going to say Fox 59 local, sorry, Indiana local. But that is very important. But we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to be talking more on Trump's policies.
Good morning, Reyhounds, and welcome back to your Wednesday show.
We have some very exciting things to talk about with our very special guest.
So what do you find unique about UND, and what kind of pulled you here?
What are you doing?
Watching Good Morning Greyhounds every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m.
In the heart of Indianapolis, our main mission is to keep you informed, bringing you local and national news. With the upcoming presidential election, there's no better time than now to tune in. But the most important part is you. This is UND TV News.
Are you feeling alone in your faith? UND Catholic gives you an opportunity to get involved in a religious community on campus, providing sacramental needs and fellowship for prospective students and giving you a sense of belonging.
We just want you guys to know that God loves you, He delights in you, and He's in awe of you. And we would love to meet you. So you should come on out.
UIndy Catholic, a community for you.
For children who may have high-functioning autism, may have ADHD, processing challenges, working memory issues, sensory integration issues, those types of challenges. It's a place where human beings are valued, children are respected. It's a progressive school that takes a hands-on approach.
Welcome back to Good Morning Greyhounds Election Edition. We're going to shift gears now and talk about the 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and what he plans to do in office. The final count, like you said earlier, was 277 electoral votes for Trump and 224 for Harris. And the only states that haven't gotten their votes in so far is Arizona, Alaska, and Nevada. So we have a lot to talk about. I think it's really important to talk about these policies because college students need to know about it.
Absolutely.
If anything, these policies are going to affect college students more than anyone. I mean, we're the upcoming generation. So the first one I want to talk about, which is extremely controversial, Trump has said that he hasn't read it, he's not going to read it, he's not sure what is even going on, Project 2025.
Yes, and I'm surprised we didn't hear more about this in the campaign. I think it was discussed when Biden was still the candidate, and then when Harris was selected, there was such a focus on her as a candidate and what she would be like. Right? It almost fell by the wayside, right? But Project 2025 is this very conservative prospectus, if you will, about what a second administration under Donald Trump would look like. And now that we've seen the election results, we know that's what we'll have. It's unclear whether or not it's legitimate. Right? There have been questions about whether it's conspiratorial, would it be actually implemented, but you're talking about a lot of wide-sweeping, very conservative policies. And the idea of Project 2025 was get Donald Trump back in the White House, and then these policies, this approach to governments would be possible.
I mean, how would they even implement Project 2025? Is this something that Trump would have to be behind, or are they able to go forward with it if he doesn't really agree? Or
well, it would require massive government support at the federal level. But I think with our point before the commercial break, the Republicans control the Senate. If they were able to get the House, they already have the White House, right? That's the trifecta in terms of unified government, so that would be important. We can also talk about the Supreme Court. They're not up for election, so it didn't get a lot of attention last night. But of the 9-member Supreme Court we have, it's a 6-3 conservative court. So it's likely, if there were questions in terms of judicial review with regards to constitutionality of decisions, it's likely that they would uphold and support those, which would be essential to Project 2025. You can pass legislation, you can have a president sign it, but the concept of judicial review is that the court is going to assess whether or not it's constitutional. A 6-3 court leaning heavily conservative is more likely to do that.
And I have just read so many different topics regarding Project 2025 of what could be done, now that Trump is in office. And I want to just touch on some of the topics that I have heard about that I have no idea if they're true or not, because I've heard so many different things. I just want to get your take on it as well. The first one being, so far, whenever I read this from the Project 2025 website just yesterday, they are going to ensure that transgender men are not in women's sports. So can you touch on what you've heard about that so far?
Yeah, well, we've actually seen state legislatures attack that issue. In Indiana, that was a major issue, I think 2 legislative sessions ago. But that's something that's really important in terms of like the culture wars and a social issue for Americans. Of course, it's far more complicated than it sounds in terms of Project 2025. There's nothing federal that's been done at this point, but the argument of Project 2025 is that this is something that would enshrine it at the federal level, making it wide-sweeping, and probably important for students to remember when there's a conflict between federal and state, the federal government wins out. So right now we do see some states, including Indiana, that have legislation like that, but this would make it national in those states that don't currently have that.
Okay, very interesting. And then the next topic I want to talk about is cutting the growth of government to reduce inflation.
Yes.
So how exactly would they even go about that?
Well, we heard this recently. Elon Musk said if he was a part of the administration that he would be able to cut a significant portion of the budget. It goes beyond the number that we have for discretionary spending. So the American budget, the U.S. federal budget, is divided in discretionary and military. Discretionary is everything except for military. The number he said he would cut goes beyond that, and I don't think he's suggesting he's going to cut military. There may have been a number issue there. But he, in particular, was saying, well, this is how I do it. This is what I'd look at. The specifics are not very clear, but I think that one's probably the most realistic part of Project 2025. Republicans generally want to cut and reduce government, both in terms of size and numbers, but also in terms of cost. It doesn't have a direct relation to inflation, and we know inflation is a real problem that was obviously very important for voters. But I would expect to see, in terms of like the government cuts, I think that one is really going to be important for Congress in this upcoming session.
Okay, yeah, thank you for explaining that. That rings some bells in my head. Another one I want to talk about too, we're going to touch on it here in a few minutes, but securing the border, finishing the wall. Trump wants to make it as long as humanly possible. Is that going to be able to happen? And then also deporting illegal immigrants. How exactly can he go about that? Because he can't just be like, oh, you're an immigrant, I'm going to go ahead and deport you. Like, they have to at least meet some certain criteria, right?
Yeah, the process for deportations, and he's talked about mass deportations, so you're not just talking about on an individual basis. This is like an aggregate, a large group. It's very unclear what that would look like. And I think in part because it hasn't happened before in that way. So what that process would be, who would be involved in that, what the adjudication process is to challenge those decisions, we really don't know. And I would expect we hear from that in the forthcoming months, certainly. What he wants to do, we know. How the president would do that is less clear. In terms of the wall, that's an interesting point because Donald Trump was president 4 years ago and ultimately had campaigned on saying, like, I'm going to build a wall and Mexico will pay for it. We didn't fully build the wall and Mexico didn't pay for it. So I'm not sure what's different in these next 4 years, except if he has congressional support, right? And if he has Elon Musk, for example, dealing with his finances.
Are they going to team up or something?
He could be a part of the administration, maybe a cabinet. That's
my gosh.
It's a presidential position. The president gets to nominate. The Senate confirms the appointment. And that you're talking about both Republicans here. So I don't know that Musk necessarily wants to leave his position, but that when we're talking about the whole, right, things could align where it makes it more possible. I just want to add, he's the 47th president. He's also the 45th. And in terms of the wall happening 4 years, in the 4 years he was president, we didn't see it then. So I'm not sure what makes it different now to see.
Well, and I'm glad you kind of said earlier that you're not exactly sure how they would do this mass deportation of illegals. And I just want to touch on that because that's why so many people are upset and have so much anxiety about this election because Trump has said before, you know, I have concepts of a plan. I know Kamala Harris has said the same regarding certain policies. And it is just crazy to me. We shouldn't be so anxious about this election. And it honestly just makes me really sad.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to be really empathetic to every candidate that ever runs for office. It's very, very difficult. But also, we like to think like, oh, we evaluate candidates based on policy, and we want to know all the ins and outs and the details, right? Like when it comes to parenting, when it comes to teaching some classes, I have concepts of a plan until I get, starting to plan, and I'm right there. We don't know necessarily what the dynamics are, what the details are going to be. And so I'm empathetic to the candidates because they don't always have a clear-cut understanding of what the process is. I think that's also where, as voters, we have to hard press and be like, so what are some ways we could do this? Doesn't have to be the one that you're committing to, different routes, different steps, right? But what would this look like? That's where I think the deportations is going to be very difficult to execute. It's great for Donald Trump in terms of a campaign line. And we actually saw in terms of exit polls, a lot of legal immigrants and people who had immigrated who are now American citizens voted and supported Trump because they said they didn't like that other people had gone through hadn't gone through the process. They'd gone illegally. I just think the tricky thing for candidates and voters is there's always going to be a lot of gray area. You're not always going to know what that looks like. Now the election's over. That part of decision making is done. The actual process and the policy starts now, and that's going to be made more clear for us in the next weeks and months, really.
Well, I can't wait to hear more about what you have to say regarding Trump's policies, but we're going to go ahead and continue this conversation right after this break.
elementary and middle school. Discover the dawn difference. A school where you can celebrate others. Come together as a community. Be a part of a learning environment where students and teachers are appreciated. In Madonna, a culture that can't be beat, that's going onward together. A school filled with love. In Madonna.
I love my school.
Welcome back to Good Morning Greyhounds Election Edition. We're going to go ahead and continue our conversation regarding Trump's policies. The 47th President of the United States. Still can't believe it's the next morning and we already know who won. Like we said earlier, though, there's still 3 states that have not decided. Yes, sorry. Guys, I got 3 hours of sleep. I'm a little bit.
It's real. That's the excitement
Yes.
and exhaustion of election night. And if you're not feeling both, you aren't living it right.
Yes, so I've been asking a lot of questions to you. Do you have any questions for me to kind of close out the show, like as a college student?
Yeah.
And this was the first election that I voted in.
That was going to be my first question. So what was it like as a first-time voter? This is a really exciting election, by the way. My first time was 2004. It was meh in comparison.
But you're 21.
Pardon?
You're 21.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, this is my second.
Don't age
yes.
yourself.
Oh, so flattering. But what was it like? This was such an exciting election to participate in.
So I walked in, first of all, I got there at 5 a.m. and stood in the rain for an hour. I'm a dedicated American citizen.
Good for you.
Yes, and I even did that after I spent 30 minutes curling my hair.
And so you spent another 30 minutes
I
later?
sure did, yes. I sure did. I walked in thinking that it was going to be a paper ballot. I did not know that it was going to be electronic.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know why I thought that. I think I just wanted to like get the feeling of like marking the little bubble, you know. But honestly, it was a little confusing. I was like looking at all these buttons and I was like, this looks like when my boyfriend plays like his PlayStation and he's hitting all these buttons and I have no idea what they mean. This woman was very kind and she kind of explained it to me a little bit beforehand. I think she knew that I was young and I was voting for him first time. And it was really special too because my brother, who's 18, he got to vote in this election too, so we got to go together.
Awesome.
He definitely got mad that I wanted to take a couple pictures with our I voted sticker.
But you can do it, and you can in Indiana you can take a ballot selfie, which I think is so cool. I have to admit I didn't have makeup on when I voted early yesterday, so I didn't take one. But I thought about it afterwards. I took my children, and my husband also took. We kind of split up with the kids, just timing-wise, the way our schedule was. But it's really fun. They get the sticker too, and I feel like to model that kind of behavior, like you're saying, to vote with someone, so you get that shared experience, but also that feeling of like it's a responsibility, it's a right, it's an obligation, but it's something, especially as women, that so many people fought for us to be able to deal. To get to exercise that, for me, feels like a really important moment.
Oh my gosh, and that is so emotional too, because thinking back, like, we had no rights as women, and here we are today, me and you, we are moderators for the debate. We are sitting here right now discussing the debate the next day, and it's just absolutely crazy to me. I'm very thankful to be able to vote and voice my opinion because, you know, your opinion is your voice. Or I said that wrong. Your opinion is your voice.
Yeah, and
your voice is your power. Your voice is your power.
And it genuinely is. I think like when I talk to college students in terms of elections, this is the one time your government's asking you, how are we doing, right? And it really is the one time. You don't have control over legislation. Only members of Congress can introduce that. You don't have control over the legality of issues. That's a Supreme Court decision. Voting is the one time you get to have a say, and I think that's so important for students, for anyone to remember. This is it. This is the one moment, the one opportunity. You have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and that's really exciting. And I know, like, I've gone, like, for Policy Matters, if you guys didn't know, I produce a show for her every week called Policy Matters alongside Grayson Holt. Be sure to check that out. But like I said, we go around a lot and we interview people, college students. We even go downtown and interview people, and it's just amazing to see everyone else's point of view. You know, some people really care about the election. Yesterday I actually went around and I was like, hey, like, how are you feeling today about the election? Are you excited or are you nervous? And a lot of people were like, I'm so excited. I'm so politically inclined. And other people were like, it's election day? Like, and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, it's election day.
I think, like, honestly, that kind of diversity is really interesting to me too, because for someone like me, it does matter a lot. Like, election day is like Christmas.
Oh my gosh, hold on just a second. You remind me of something. We have prepared so much for this election, UND Studios as a whole, that yesterday when we were all getting ready, I was like, I feel like I'm getting ready with my bridesmaids. It's my wedding day.
Yes.
We've spent so much money and time prepping for this.
Yes, and then it's over, and you're like,
Yes.
oh, like you're exhausted.
What do I do now?
But you're just like kind of in that moment, and I think sometimes it's easy. When we talked about echo chambers earlier, it's easy for me to forget that not everyone pays attention to it. Not everyone necessarily cares. There are probably people watching right now, college students, that are like, oh, that was yesterday. I completely forgot.
Yeah.
And I think the nice thing, at least with elections, sometimes people get bummed out or they're excited, whatever it might be. There's always a next one, right? There's always an opportunity to vote in the next one. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're registered well in advance and make sure you're informed. But I think that's the best part of democracy. It keeps moving. And that's something that I'm personally really grateful for.
We are very blessed to be living in this country. Thank you so much for coming on today. And thank you so much for tuning in to Good Morning Greyhounds, recapping the election with us. Don't forget to turn into the final episode of Policy Matters with Dr. Laura Merrifield-Wilson at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, which is the last show. I'm really sad about that.
Me too. I didn't realize it was the last one.
I know. And also, don't forget to tune into UND TV News today, live at 11 a.m. We're going to be recapping the election and informing you on what you need to know and why it matters to you. Thank you so much for coming on. Have a good rest of your day.